myself, and we'll finally make a.
Mastering is the final stage in record production. It's when all the creative elements come together, are brought together, and are finally polished and crafted into what will be the final product that gets delivered. It generally tends to have three prongs. There's the creative element, which is working with artists to hone their vision and make sure that the story they were trying to tell is perfectly told. There's the second part, which is diagnostic. We're sort of inspecting the audio and the files themselves to make sure that there's no anomalies or issues. Sometimes noises, things can come up through the process of recording or mixing. So we're amending that material. And we're also dealing with the third element, which is clerical, and that's metadata. That is the artist names and the song titles. And these days, we live in a very data-rich environment. And because so much material is digitally distributed, that data needs to follow along with it. Otherwise, you actually wind up with orphan files that can't be monetized by anybody specifically. So we include these days ISRC codes on a per song basis. UPC codes get coded in. And sometimes there's multiple UPCs for the digital and the physical outlets. There's song titles, album title, artist name, songwriter, composer, arranger, P&C line rights holders. There's all the text coding. We code the genre of the music into it. So there's a lot of data that gets programmed in as well, and that's all done in mastering. So it's the overview. What all those three elements really serve to do is to hand off. We kind of are the pivot point between the creative functions and the distribution of the manufacturing functions. So we're that pivot point where the artists have their last opportunity to make any creative changes they want to make, or to make sure that their vision has been served. And in that way, it's a lot of fun. It's very much we finish things in mastering. It's the finishing of a process, so it's enjoyable.
This movie's ending. It's no longer based on a dream. 'Cause tonight I'll play myself, and we'll finally make a.
My name is Stephen Marsh. I've been an independent mastering engineer for about 15 years now. And prior to that, I worked for Sony Music Studios in the 90s. That's where I sort of came up and cut my teeth. My studio has sort of evolved over time, much the way that mastering has evolved over time. It was typically done more or less in sort of large facilities, a warren of studios, and a whole cadre of people that would service the needs of those specific things. And it's evolved nowadays into a more personal prospect. A lot of mastering engineers work one-on-one with the artist. It's very much less sort of a process in, process out, a lot more hands-on. And the technology has allowed us, in a large case, to make the same amount of work be a lot more specific, a lot more boutique, and a lot more responsive to the artist's specific needs, each artist, and still get the process done in the same amount of time. Technological advances have made it so that we're no longer, I don't spend typically some sessions when we're doing tape-based sessions that we do, but the majority of sessions I'm no longer spending an hour to an hour and a half simply fast-forwarding or rewinding to get to places. So the nonlinearity of the process has really sped up the efficiency with which you can work. Whereas previously, if a mix came in that needed a lot of help versus a mix came in that was pretty much ready to go, just really needed to be run through the desk, those almost take the same amount of time now. So the elements that used to slow us down have changed, and the facility you need for that has changed, which is all to say that I now work at an independent facility, just myself and another engineer, and we're able to handle what gets done here. I no longer need a duplication room or somebody to come in at night to make 14 different master copies of what I just did during the day. There's no, half a dozen CD refs that all need to be printed and then labeled and then shipped, all those sort of additional functions which allowed or made a facility really necessary, has sort of fallen away. So it's evolved over time. But for the time being, it's an independent prospect for the most part. And that merely mirrors the way that artists are creating now.
Only changing up their name. Almost found in each other's hands. When different paths didn't mean different plans. No return trip after the day. Just free will, blood pumping, my little runaway. My little runaway.
It's very plausible and is being done now that an AI or sort of a bot program could do a mastering job. It's very fast. They generally sound pretty good. And it's very cost effective. Whether or not, so I guess the quick answer to the question of could a bot do what I do is absolutely yes, and they do already. Now the cold reality of that is that every artist is looking for something different out of mastering. And as mastering has grown and evolved from just simply a process of what initially was let's take this piece of creativity and form it so that we can mass produce it and deliver it to the public. It's much less about that sort of factory mentality now. It's much more about creating a bespoke, unique piece of art that the artist is truly at the center of and not just a function in. And in that way, mastering has evolved to become extremely creative. It's also just as technical as it's ever been, if not more technical, but it's also extremely creative. And that's been a slow evolving process to the point now that I think that's one of the reasons that we've seen the rise of sort of this bot or this AI culture for quick mastering and low cost mastering. When you have a demo and you just want to present it to a label to get their opinions, or you're a songwriter and you want to share your music with songwriters so that they get a vibe on what you're doing, or you're a publisher and you're pitching material to artists, like there are instances in a lot of cases where a lot of materials sifting through the business that actually isn't in its final form. And mastering is really about taking things and placing them into their final form. A lot of those are sort of temp versions or intermediary versions that are going to be further developed. There's still white left on the page to be colored in. So in a lot of cases, what the artist is seeking for out of the mastering isn't necessarily to make sure their creative statement is preserved. It's to make sure that the idea or the kernel of what they are is presented in a fashion that's consistent enough with finished goods that it can be viewed in that light and be critiqued in that light. And in that regard, I think there's a really great place for those algorithms to fit in. And the low cost and the fast turnaround is absolutely a breadwinner. On the other end of things, once you've got that material sold, once you have the label budget, once you've got the video that you're putting together, once you've got the piece of, whatever that kernel is that somebody has said, yeah, I believe there's a actual intrinsic market value in that. Let's run with it. Let's see what we come up with and let's take it to market. Then that's where really the mastering engineer, I think, in the modern sense fits in. It's not about creating product. It's really about creating art these days. And I should say also that mastering's really always been about that. Mastering's always been about art. It just sort of got bogged down in the mass productification of everything, the mass productization, whatever that's not a word. The mass commoditization of music products, to the point that in order to handle the sheer volume of music, and we're now at peak music consumption, more music is being consumed by more individuals more often than ever before on the planet. So there's more music being created than ever before, and there's simply not enough volume in professional mastering boutiques to handle all of that music. So I think the AI and the bots actually really serve a good purpose. And yeah, they can do my job. I don't think they could do it as well, and they certainly can't respond to a set of notes. But that's what we're for. And eventually maybe they come up and replace us, but I think we got a few years left. I think humans have a few years left in the seat.
Somehow she knew that he wouldn't tell. Left him molded and folded, pasted and cut. Left him blinded by everything she said was love. Her favorite game became arranging his edited heart. She knew he'd take it, she'd fake it, he'd fall apart. He can't see clearly now, clearly now. Through love tinted eyes, tinted
good master for me is one that allows me to understand exactly what the story being told is, and that conveys that message in a very concise manner. And by that I mean a mix or a master that the soft parts draw you in, the loud parts bump you back. The width and the depth and the grandness of what's being played is allowed to breathe and exist in a space greater than that of just the speakers. The guide, sort of the docent through the museum, if you will, the guide that's supposed to lead you through. In a pop song, usually it's the vocal, or in instrumental music, it's usually an instrument, is featured properly. So you don't have to think about, what am I supposed to be listening to? There's some experimental music, mind you, that where I think part of the idea is in general that you're supposed to be distracted somewhat by the creativity itself, so that you can sort of catch those little cracks and see the facets that you're not going to see when you just stare at something straight on. But a lot of pop music isn't that. And I think that's, for me, one thing that makes a great master is when you can blend those elements together and create intrigue and interest and depth and height and width and theater without actually having to enforce this specific, very narrow-minded kind of like, let's make everything, at the beginning of the song, let's slam everything up into your face. Let's shove everything at you all at the same time so you're totally distracted, and 3.5 minutes later, we'll release you. And you sort of like sit back and recoil from what just happened. I think there's a place for that too, but that for me, that and I don't want to get into the making differentiations. I should say up front that at this point in the time, there has been a trend towards loud, sort of in-your-face mastering for so long. I don't think we can call it wrong at this point, because clearly enough artists are making the creative decision to go with that. So I think we have to call it a style. I really do. And I think that is an art form in and of itself, and I don't think we should necessarily judge it for what it is. I don't happen to appreciate that style in the way that I work, and the clients that I tend to work with don't generally appreciate that style from my work. So I don't really fall into that camp, but I can't disregard the fact that there's a large number of people that do and are successful with it. And there's some, getting back to what we were talking about earlier with, there's an artist that's telling a story and is trying to take me on a journey. Sometimes that journey doesn't require pretty pictures. Sometimes it requires ugly, gory stuff. And sonics need to back that up and support that vision, support that story. So there's certain topics that, I don't know that every heavy metal record should be dulcet and have a lot of dynamic fortitude and allow the listener to fall in. I think a lot of metal records should probably be pretty much right up in your face, and rightly so. It's that kind of music. So there's a time and place for everything. So I want to preface my statements by saying that I don't actually inherently think that sort of loud, distorted mastering is a bad thing or a wrong thing. It's just a thing. It's a style, and it's something that people choose. It's a decision that you make, and you find out what's appropriate for the material. Some things are intended to offend, and some things aren't, and rightly so. But for me, as a personal decision, I think what makes a great master is the dynamics. It's the ability to fall in and get drawn in when something's soft and it's intimate, and the ability to sort of be repulsed when you're supposed to be repulsed, and to also sort of step into the mix a little bit and look around all the corners, and as I talk about, like, to hear those facets and to understand like what was going on, the layers of material that were put together to create the mix, and the way that the sounds were blended to give an impression. And that's what mastering is really about for me, and that's what I think makes great masters, when all those things are sort of in their place. They sound natural. I like things to sound natural and full and rich. So for me, that's it. It's really comes down to sort of dynamic performance and doing what serves the story being told the greatest, and not getting distracted by whiz bangers and dingle flutzers and all this kind of crazy stuff.
Maybe the best part, the wind grabbed and pushed and pulled her, the wind took her by surprise, the wind spun as fast as she could, the wind made her want to fly.
Caulden Road, the mixes are generally good. The material comes to me with a lot of space. Alan's not like a compression, junkie or anything. The mixers that he uses and has used are not level junkies, which is great. I like when material comes to me and it has a little bit of space, a little bit of room for me to work, and that doesn't necessarily always mean headroom. If the loudest sample on the file is at 0 dB full scale, that's fine, as long as every sample in the file is in a 0 dB full scale. And the reason is because a lot of times decisions about how you get the level are made too soon in the process. I think when those decisions, when the conscious decision is made to slam everything to the wall at the recording process, that inherently follows into the mix process and the mastering. And guess what? It happens 2 more times. If you slam it to the wall in the recording, you generally wind up slamming it to the wall in the mix, and then you wind up asking to slam it to the wall again in the master. The reason being, you're trying to get that thing that you obliterated by slamming it to the wall in the recording process. So my preference is to have people leave room. We can get a ton of level in here if we need to, and if somebody wants that, I can do that. My only request is that it actually sound halfway decent while I do it. And the technology allows that to happen in large part these days anyway. But it's about taking a measured approach and knowing it's not a finished product yet. It's not a finished product yet. When it gets to mastering, we will make it a finished product, and then we will concern ourselves with how loud does it need to be. And those standards are a moving target as well. Every time Spotify or YouTube or one of these, a Tidal, announces a new LUFS standard, or loudness units full scale, that affects how we work in these rooms. That affects how hard we push things. And strangely enough, sometimes it has a negative effect. Sometimes you find, man, my client told me to shoot for a -14 LUFS, but this thing needs the glue of some compression, and that winds up pumping it up to -10, -11, -9, -8. But it works for the music, and that again is where a human being really plays a key role in mastering, is knowing, well, it's not just about getting it to this digit, it's about how you get it there. And that's always been mastering. That's since the dawn of mastering, since guys like Bernie Grumman and Doug Sachs said, we can take this sort of perfunctory mechanical process of cutting sound into a piece of plastic so that we can manufacture it, and we can actually make it sound better. We can get more excitement. We can get a little extra level so it sounds better on radio or in a jukebox. Like, that's what mastering has always been. It's always been about the end result. It's a finishing process, so it's always been about that, which is kind of funny because the more things change, the more they stay the same. But it's always been about making the final thing sound the way it's supposed to sound. And those sounds change. But so Caulden Road, the thing I like about their mixes the most, because I got off on a tangent there, they have the sort of theatrical quality. I tend to work in film music and soundtrack music, orchestral material a lot. And a lot of that material, one thing a lot of the material shares in common is sort of a theatrical, larger than itself kind of sensation, where we touched on this earlier with that sort of the laser beam in the speakerness of a lot of pop music, where it's essentially like a mono mix with maybe a little bit of reverb or like maybe one instrument pan for effect or something, but it's essentially a lot of stuff in the middle. Their mixes they're still pop songs and they're still legitimate pop mixes, but they also have more of a theatrical element too, where the sound seems to emanate from beyond the speakers and behind the speakers and above and below, and there's depth. And they leave you enough dynamics in a room so that you can get sucked into the intimate parts and you can get pushed back by the big parts and sort of take in the beauty of it. And I love music like that. It's just music that can elicit emotions in somebody like myself who's inherently trying not to be emotional about what they're hearing. That's the magic. When you're sitting back and you're strictly trying to be other side of the glass, I want to be impartial, I want to be objective, and I want to evaluate the material, not listen, evaluate the material. And you look down and you got goosebumps and you realize that you're getting tingly inside because something is just sitting right on. It's magic. I love that. So I love it. And anytime I can get elements of that in music that comes in, it's like, it's a good day.
Now I'm just a man, working days the best I can, and my office overlooks a busy street.
Signal chain for workflow for the Caulden Road, Alan generally sends me high-res dig files. Stereo split, typically 2496, and we pull those into our workstation here. We run a Pyramix system in the studio. The console is all analog, so all the processing is actually analog. And it's all wired point to point, just like a traditional sort of recording console or your traditional mastering console. There's tube electronics, there's solid state electronics, very clean compression, and it's a very simple sort of old school system. EQ, compression, a little level, pass it through. The console does sort of have its own sort of sound because of that. A lot of discrete amp blocks, transformers, and tubes that the audio is running through. And they sort of combine to give a little bit of a gel, such that if a mix comes in and it's really good to go, I may not have to turn almost any knobs other than just get the gain set and run it through. It also has enough flexibility and enough color that if something comes in very sterile, I can color it up, vibe it up. If something comes in really colored, I can go very transparent and sort of do no harm and accentuate what's there. So it gives me a lot of flexibility. It's evolved over years. I mean, my processing chain is an extension, frankly, of the very first mastering chain that I started with 23 years ago. It's just a continual evolution. I think you'll find that with most mastering people. Things stay in your rack and then things go out of your rack. And sometimes the thing that was in your rack for 20 years magically just disappears one year because you find out that you didn't use it for 2 years or something. So there's always an evolution, and you find some things work better than others. Mastering gear is usually pretty specific and expensive. So it's not the kind of thing you're going to change out every now and again. It's the kind of thing that will evolve over time. And that's my signal chain is very much like that. So it's all outboard, off the shelf, mostly off the shelf pieces. Some of them have been custom built, some of them have been custom modified, almost all of them have been custom modified in some way, shape, or form. And usually that just goes to the way that I work or my preference in terms, I like things to be very, very clean. So almost all my power supplies have been remoted or rebuilt or remoted and rebuilt, that sort of thing. We hand select the tubes by ear, which is an ongoing evolutionary process because tubes don't last forever. So as you go through tubes, things change. Sometimes you can't get the tubes you had before. I have a pretty good stash here, so I think I'm set for a while. But so there's things like that, and a selection of transformers. Those have a very big impact on the sound. Or sometimes removing transformers from things has the greater, everything has an impact on the sound. Every scintilla of everything. It all matters. But in general, it's a very it's a very simple, basic mastering chain. A little bit of EQ, a little bit of compression. Run through the desk, maybe a touch of limiting. I generally tend to not work in the box at all. Every now and again, I need a digital limiter or something, I may do that. And I do a little isotope work in the box too, a little tick or pop or click. Sort of as we talked earlier about the diagnostic function mastering, isotope RX, we're using RX6 these days, is just stupefying in terms of its ability to very quickly handle just about almost any audio anomaly I can throw at it. There are very few things that I can't handle in a degree that not only corrects what's going on, but makes it seem as though it was never there, artifact-free restoration. And that's only something, frankly, I've been using restoration products going back to the 90s, and it was nearly impossible to get artifact-free restorations. There was almost always drawbacks in the past. Right up until maybe just the last few years, we've been able to come up with products that work very efficiently and do their job just remarkably well, which is, I'm continually amazed. And it's fun now. Clients come in and they'll have a sound, a footstep or something in their thing, and they're like, yeah, this neighbor knocked on the door while we were doing an overdub, or the dog barked or something, and in 4 seconds we take it away, and it's like, huh? Which is a lot of fun. I like doing that with clients. But although so many of them are hip to the technology these days, a lot of times I don't think I'm impressing anybody. Yeah, so signal chain is pretty basic and just super clean. And I think that's, in any mastering room, I think that's really it. Most mastering people may have a lot of gear, but if you want a hint, look at what's close to them. Every mastering person, whatever's close down on the rack, that's the stuff they're using all the time. And it's probably 1 or 2, maybe 3 things. Most mastering guys have maybe a 2 to 3 bay rack at most. So you're talking about maybe 4, 5, 6 pieces of gear. It's no different here.
A strange car came and he got inside.
Yes, definitely. The room itself is maybe the most important thing. Everything else that happens in it is almost secondary. I shouldn't say almost secondary, it's very secondary. The reality is, if you're listening in an environment that allows you to understand exactly what you're hearing, you can make very effective, very efficient decisions. You find you need less processing. The more anomalies, and I speak from experience because I've had almost a dozen mastering rooms over the years, and I've worked in a lot of different environments. Some of them were better than others. And what I found is, in the rooms that were less properly treated or properly tuned, I wanted more gear because I was always trying to figure out a way to solve what wound up being the sonic limitations of the space I was listening in. So when you're in a room that doesn't do that to you, you find you can do almost everything with like 2 pieces of equipment. So you tend to, and that's the thing, it's like, I always think it's funny when people are like, I need to get another thing or another compressor, another EQ or da 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 da. It's like, okay, well, what does it get you? Because maybe that money would be better off like adding some diffusion to your room to open it up a little bit so you can get a little more perspective on things, or treating it to begin with. I can't tell you how many, especially on the consumer side, how many listening environments I see where people spend a lot of money on a pair of speakers and a playback stack, and there's not a single element of acoustic treatment on the walls to help balance the space. Which, if you're not going to do anything, I guess that's probably the best, because you start treating if you try to sort of half treat something, a lot of times you wind up making it worse. But so proper acoustic treatment is maybe the most important thing, the most important aspect to how I do my work. And then that, of course, you peel that back one layer and you're talking about monitors. And the monitoring environment, is so key, as those go hand in hand, the monitors and the environment you're listening in. So those are probably the most, honestly, more important than almost anything on my desk. The signal chain allows me to do what I do, but what I'm hearing tells me what to do in the first place. So it's ultimately more important.
Enough, I'd find a way, no matter the price.